Coffee's been a way of life for my family and me for nearly as long as I can remember. Actually, in fact, it probably goes back much further, way beyond that, all the way to my great-grandfather's time on my mother's side of the family 150 years ago. They were coffee, tea, and cocoa merchants in Germany for many generations. And on my father's side, my family were coffee growers in Central America for most of the last century, starting with my grandmother in 1916 in Costa Rica till 1945, and then again my parents in Guatemala back in the 60s going into the 1980s, and that's where in fact I grew up on the family's coffee farm in the highland mountains of Guatemala. The towering volcanoes, the deep blue skies, the lush green vegetation, the cool, temperate, tropical mountain air, scenery as exotic and beautiful as anywhere on the planet or as anybody might be able to imagine. And that's where we farmed on our small little coffee plantation. And it's an environment, it was hard work. It was a small farm. My brothers and I all had to go work and do chores like farm kids the world over. And the families and the children that we grew up amongst, they were of the indigenous Mayan people who absolutely fascinated me, particularly their ancient culture and its lost, buried cities in the jungles of Central America and Guatemala specifically. So working hard on the farm, I often fantasized about being an archaeologist and digging up these lost cities, and that's what I wanted to be since I was 9 years old. And I grew up as soon as I became independent, doing just that, leading literally the life of an Indiana Jones, digging up ancient lost cities in the jungles and going on many expeditions, wearing the hat and the boots and the machete. The whip, however, I dispensed with. That was not really practical. And having a good time for a lot of years doing just that until 1982, which was a year of calamity in Guatemala, of social upheaval, lots of bloodshed, economic and political breakdown, a very tragic episode in Guatemala's history. And in that year, a small group of thugs wanted my family's coffee farm in Guatemala and took that away with death threats. So my parents, not being Guatemalan citizens, had no recourse to that. And the following year, I realized that my family members were struggling. My parents were going into old age with no net, no Social Security or anything else. They had lost everything that they had managed to build in their lives, and they were going to retire on that coffee farm. So I couldn't really enjoy what I was doing, the life of an Indiana Jones. And if there's one thing that I learned from my studies as an anthropologist, was that the family unit is the core and the cohesive glue that holds cultures and civilizations together throughout time and today as well. And so I decided my place was with my family, to help my family out in a time of need. So I came here to Orange County in Southern California to help my parents out. And I thought I'd just do that for a few years and then resume my life as an Indiana Jones, but that was not to happen. My passion and my efforts led me to create a coffee house company that I named Diedrich Coffee, in my family name, in honor of, and with the old world tradition of putting your family name on the line in that old world family honor tradition and cycle. And the company prospered. And these were times, unlike today, where, of course, we see coffee houses on every street corner, and people growing up in this time, in this day and age, regard the coffeehouse phenomenon as having been part of American history for all of time. However, it wasn't more than 25 years ago when that was not the case. Back in those days, when I started Diedrich Coffee, people didn't even know what an espresso was. And they would argue often with me that the cappuccinos that I was serving were not, because a true cappuccino was in fact an alcoholic beverage. And you have to think that in those days, if you'd ever see an espresso machine, it was in a bar. And even the bartender didn't so much know what to do with that, so he'd concoct a drink so horrible that he'd have to put a shot of alcohol in it to anesthetize it. So you can't blame people in that time of thinking that a cappuccino was an alcoholic beverage. So I had a large struggle to overcome, and eventually I did, and Diedrich Coffee prospered. And the single biggest accomplishment that I have achieved, proudly achieved, was to set my parents up with a modest but a comfortable retirement where they'd never have to worry about things ever again. And of course, my passion led me to go beyond that and to create a company that really became a intricate part of the local social fabric here in Orange County. And it prospered and continued to grow. And I became aware that I wasn't really even in the coffee business so much as I was in the people business. And that became one of my beliefs and the fundamentals of what I was doing. And the company continued to grow, and along came the corporate executives who then eventually took the company public. It was publicly traded on NASDAQ and Wall Street, and it became the second largest specialty coffee company in North America after Starbucks, nationwide. Thank you. And eventually, the corporate execs lost sight, if they ever had sight of it to begin with, sadly, of what was at the core of what made the company successful and what it was really all about, being that it was a people business. For them, it was all about profit, particularly after it went public. And the whole motive for them was to make money as quickly, as much as, and as fast as possible. And having lost sight of the true nature of what we were doing, the company was horribly and sadly mismanaged, and eventually it ceased to exist. It had pursued the wrong objectives for the wrong motives. And years before that happened, however, I left the company. I was not aware that I was playing a chess game with these people. And eventually, on the very last day of my employment contract, on June 30th of 2004, they called checkmate on me. I didn't realize that I was being very carefully maneuvered out of the company, and so it was game over at that point. But the one thing, or the handful of things that they didn't get from me, was my health, my happiness, my wherewithal to do something like this again because it comes from within, my reputation and good standing in my community, and above all, my wonderful family. And these were the things that I utilized to rebuild myself immediately after leaving Diedrich Coffee. You know, coffee is in my blood, it's in my DNA, it's who I am, it's what I do. And so I restarted all over again with my wife Karen and our young son Kean, who was 7 at the time. And we started a new coffeehouse company here in Newport Beach and named it in our son's honor, Kean Coffee. Because for me it was no longer about my past accomplishments. What we were about to do was take the coffee house experience to the next level. And it was more about the future than anything in the past. And so we thought Kean is a wonderful name for our new endeavors. And furthermore, I couldn't use my family name Diedrich as a trade name any longer. And Kean is still in the family, so we thought that was quite appropriate. And Kean Coffee prospers today. We Shortly after opening our first location in Newport Beach, we opened another one in Tustin, and the coffee company continues to grow, and it's an integral part of the local social fabric in our community once again. And my wife, Karen, and our son, Kean, and I feel very proud and happy and deeply fulfilled that we get to use our craft and our effort to provide something useful to our communities, and in return receive that reciprocity of our communities that supports and sustains us. And now perhaps when Kean grows up, he may make a choice of continuing along the path of choosing to make coffee a way of life for perhaps the 5th generation in our family. Thank you.